Power is often imagined as something that knows when to stop, that it recognizes its own limits, that expansion is a choice, not a condition. Napoleon Bonaparte is usually described as a man who wanted too much, too fast, until ambition outran reason. But what if the more unsettling truth is that stopping was never fully available to him once authority began to work as designed? This essay reframes why Napoleon could not stop expanding power, not as personal excess, not as psychological hunger, but as a structural trap built into the kind of authority he inherited, reshaped, and came to embody. His wars matter not because of their drama, but because they expose how power, once stabilized through obedience and victory, begins to mistake continuation for survival. What follows is not a lesson in leadership, but a pressure pattern, one that repeats wherever authority believes consolidation can be paused without consequence. Napoleon emerges clearly into view in late 18th century France, a state exhausted by revolution, yet still dependent on centralized authority to function. The Directory governs in name, but not in legitimacy. France is at war with multiple European coalitions. Its borders are unstable. Its economy is fragile. Its army, however, is large, experienced, and politicized. Napoleon's early commands in Italy and Egypt occur within this environment, where military success is not ornamental. It is the primary source of national coherence. By 1799, after the coup of Brumaire, Napoleon becomes first consul. By 1804, he crowns himself emperor. The institutions he inherits are revolutionary in origin, but imperial in structure. Centralized administration, mass conscription, standardized law through the civil code, and an army whose loyalty is bound to victory. At first, expansion appears defensive. Austria, Prussia, Britain, Russia. These powers do not accept the permanence of a revolutionary empire. Coalitions reform repeatedly. Treaties are signed, then quietly abandoned. Each war ends not with stable peace, but with temporary suspension. Napoleon's authority grows inside this cycle. Victory reinforces legitimacy. Legitimacy demands security. Security, in turn, requires further victories. The system does not reward restraint. It punishes hesitation by reopening conflict on worse terms. So expansion is not a burst forward, but a narrowing corridor. There is a moment after Austerlitz in 1805 when Europe pauses. The Holy Roman Empire dissolves. Austria is subdued. Prussia hesitates. Napoleon stands at the height of military credibility. But the authority he commands now rests on momentum rather than settlement. The French army is structured for movement, not garrison. The state's finances depend on indemnities from defeated powers. His legitimacy among elites depends on continued dominance abroad to justify consolidation at home. Even peace becomes unstable, because peace offers no mechanism to sustain obedience at the scale his authority has reached. Here the pressure quietly shifts. Expansion is no longer about enemies, it is about coherence. Every new territory reorganized under French administration introduces standardized laws, tax systems, and political appointments. These reforms promise order, but they also expose the empire's dependence on enforcement. Authority stretches geographically, but its tolerance for dissent shrinks. Satellite states are created: the Confederation of the Rhine, the Kingdom of Italy, client rulers drawn from Napoleon's family. Each addition simplifies control on paper while increasing fragility in practice. Loyalty becomes conditional. Withdrawal becomes costly. Napoleon's decisions begin to close off alternatives without announcing themselves as irreversible. The continental system, designed to weaken Britain through economic blockade, requires compliance across Europe. Neutrality becomes indistinguishable from resistance. States that deviate threaten the credibility of the system itself. Portugal's refusal draws French troops into Iberia. Spain's internal collapse invites intervention. What begins as enforcement becomes occupation. Occupation demands garrisons. Garrisons provoke insurgency. Insurgency drains legitimacy faster than defeat ever could. At this point, authority is still intact. Napoleon commands armies, he dictates treaties, but his power now depends on constant demonstration. Delayed feedback distorts judgment. Victories suppress warning signals. Resistance appears as ingratitude rather than structural backlash. The system trains its leader to interpret strain as defiance, not saturation. Each response further commits resources. Each correction narrows future flexibility. Silence enters the record here, not as absence of events, but as absence of recalibration. There is no institutional mechanism to tell Napoleon that expansion has ceased to produce stability. Advisors are bound to success. Generals are rewarded for aggression. Administrative systems report compliance until they collapse. Authority hears only what sustains it. By the time the Peninsular War bleeds French forces year after year, retreat would signal weakness across the entire imperial architecture. So retreat becomes unthinkable, not because of pride, but because of cascading consequences. Russia in 1812 is often framed as the moment of madness, but structurally, it is an enforcement problem carried too far. The continental system fails without Russian participation. Allowing Russia to defect would expose the system's fragility everywhere else. Napoleon faces a narrowing choice set. Enforce compliance or concede that his authority has limits. Concession threatens legitimacy across Europe. Enforcement promises risk, but preserves the appearance of control. Authority chooses the option that delays acknowledgement of constraint. The invasion is immense. The Grande Armée crosses borders with logistical assumptions drawn from earlier campaigns. Space behaves differently here. Supply lines stretch. Scorched earth removes sustenance. Time, not battle, becomes the enemy. Yet even as losses mount, the logic of authority persists. To stop advancing is to admit failure. To retreat early is to validate resistance. So movement continues, not because success is likely, but because stopping would fracture the belief system holding the empire together. After Moscow, after retreat, after catastrophic loss, something changes, but not immediately. Napoleon still raises armies, he still negotiates, he still commands obedience. Authority under pressure does not collapse all at once. It sheds capacity unevenly. Allies defect, territories revolt. But the core belief, that control is recoverable, remains intact longer than the material conditions supporting it. This is the most dangerous phase. Power mistakes. Endurance for resilience. The fracture is quiet. There is no single moment when expansion definitively ends. There are only accumulating signals that no longer alter behavior. Authority confronts its limits indirectly, through delays, shortages, unreliable allies, and public exhaustion. Yet each signal is interpreted tactically, not structurally. A lost battle requires a new army. A rebellion requires repression. A treaty requires revision. The system remains oriented toward forward motion, even as space to move forward disappears. Napoleon abdicates in 1814, returns briefly, and is defeated again. But the deeper pattern does not end with him. The authority structure he embodied had already demonstrated its logic. Expansion was not excess layered onto power. It was the means by which power maintained coherence once it surpassed certain thresholds. Stopping would have required dismantling the very mechanisms that made obedience possible at scale. The unsettling implication is not about Napoleon's ambition. It is about how authority, once stabilized through movement and victory, loses the capacity to stand still without unraveling. Expansion becomes less a desire than a delay, a way to postpone recognition that control has outrun legitimacy. Power does not always fall because it reaches too far. Sometimes it falls because it cannot stop reaching, even when the ground beneath it has already thinned beyond repair. For more reflections on history, power, and human nature, subscribe to Timeless Questions.